did ask, but she was not.
Well, it's being reported tonight at the board event, so I'll be there with that.
Okay.
So basically, right now we have 1.3, and sorry, I'm gonna read it because I don't have it memorized. About 1.325 billion is our district's facility replacement value. That's an estimated, and just so that folks understand, it doesn't include a major like renovation or building from scratch, tearing a building down and rebuilding, because that has a lot of other costs that our software wouldn't plan on. So it's really replacing like for like. So if I wanted to come in and tear the carpet out and replace it, it's the basic costs of what a facility replacement would be. So it gets really confusing, but right now that is what our software program is reporting. I don't know if people want a background on what our software is, or I don't think we have time for that. So I'm just gonna keep going. It was an increase of 24% from last year by about, so an increase of about $257 million. We anticipate that it's the increase in construction costs and just the costs for materials and labor have gone up. So that's why those dollars had increased. Our deferred maintenance also increased, and many of you who are involved in Blueprint might be hearing renewal and replacement costs. That's the same thing. So deferred maintenance, renewal, replacement costs, they're all kind of the same, have the same meaning. So right now we have 1,669 million, sorry, in deferred maintenance or
I was
renewal.
like, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an increase of about almost 40 million from last year. And we are at 12.79% of the total replacement value of our buildings. So the increases are related to the inflationary costs of products,
Does
materials,
the software
labor.
just spit that out, or do you guys use like a capital reserve company to do a appraisal and analysis for you guys?
No, we have everything in our software.
It just comes out of the software.
Well, it does, with a lot of work of inputting things and updating things, and so it doesn't just spit it out, but that's where we get it from, yeah.
You update with assumptions.
So our team updates annually based on our annual audit. So we audit about a fifth of our district's assets every year, so about just over 1 million square feet. And from that audit, we update Cost Lab where we can. And then also CB Richard Ellis owns Cost Lab, and they do an annual update of costs and labor and materials. So they do a study and a market study and update it.
Got it.
So
So
it
the
is a
software is
hosted-
CBRE software.
It's owned by CB Richard Ellis,
Got
and it's called Cost Lab. So it is a hosted software. By the way, we're getting ready to transition. I told everybody last year we'd be transitioned by now, but the transition is pretty massive for us. So next year, when we report to you, I have a sneaking suspicion these dollar amounts are going to be quite a bit higher because it's a different approach. The software is just different and has more opportunities to have more information in it. So we are exceeding the 10% that is allowed by our, what do I want to say?
Board policy?
Yes, thank you. And that is just because our deferred maintenance continues to increase, costs continue to increase. And even though we spent about 4 million in 2023 on improvements, we're just not able to keep up with the items that continue to become deferred. So that's increasing faster than the work that we can accomplish. Does that make sense? That's a very fast, I don't know how much time I had, but I can answer any questions about the software, about our processes.
The construction costs are volatile, right, with
Yes.
economic cycles. They go up and they go down.
Correct.
You know, you've got HOAs that have the same rule of like you have to provide for a certain amount. And, you know, sometimes you decide, okay, well, we're at the peak of the economic cycle and eventually the cost will come back down. Like with the rule of 10%, what's the district policy around that? Compliance with it? What does that mean?
Well, what we've reported is that we're not in compliance. We anticipate to continue to not be in compliance until we probably pass a bond. Because and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question properly, but we don't anticipate, due to all the funding models, and Gina would be able to speak to this much better than I can, but we don't anticipate an infusion of funds coming in for maintenance of our buildings. It's just not gonna happen. So as deferred maintenance increases, construction costs have gotten a little bit better, but labor is still very high. It's not gonna come back down to pre-COVID. So until we really knock out a lot with another big bond, we're just gonna keep seeing that increase. We can't keep up with it. So we don't have a plan to add more money or maybe there would be an increase in our limit. I don't know that. That would be a board policy thing if they said, well, let's increase it to 15%. I don't see that coming either. So I think we'll be in non-compliance for a while.
Is there an industry standard on that percentage for deferred maintenance? I was just curious how we got to 10%.
I don't know. Since I've been here, it's been at 10%.
We've had it at
And I've been
10%.
here for 16 years.
Okay.
So it's a great question, Gina. Because we've typically been under it. I think last year we were over, and as this reports, we're going to continue to be over unless we pass a bond. And it'll take even multiple years of that bond cycle to bring us back down.
And deferred maintenance doesn't mean these are immediate needs that we've got to take care of. It's like, think about your roof on your house. It has a lifespan, and we, of course, will replace it when it has to be, but we're not going to replace it before it has to be. Even if it says your life is 10 and it lasts 15, yay, but that 5 years, it would be part of deferred maintenance, right? Is that a good way to explain that?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Because your deferred maintenance, you said it's $169 million, that's like $40 million from last year.
Yes.
So it's like close to 30% increase in 1 year. Yeah.
And a lot of it, so as we've really dove into our software, we've disagreed with some of the life expectancies they've placed on things. We've lowered some of ours. We've adjusted things. Every year, our data in our software gets better. It'll never be perfect. It's just too much, and I have one person that can work on it 20% of their time, and whenever I have time. So the data gets better, and when the data gets better, it tends to make that number go up because it means we're able to put more information in, and it just increases the value, and then it increases deferred maintenance. So it was a substantial, and Cost Lab did increase their labor and their materials quite a bit this past year.
I mean, in the 16 years you've had here, this isn't the first time this has happened, right? It's probably been.
Being out of compliance. Last year we were out of compliance. I don't remember the previous year. I think we were in compliance the previous year barely. I don't recall. So I think this is the second year in a row. But before that, I don't remember not being in compliance, but we could have been in non-compliance right before the bond passed way back in 15. I just don't recall.
I guess, what's the implications of not being in compliance with district policy?
So this is Chris's policy. So Chris, part of Chris's responsibility to the board is to meet these policies.
Yeah.
So it would be the board's responsibility with Chris to review any misses in those policies. I think traditionally, based on my review, the board has been okay. Like they can review any sort of.
So is there an official board approval for a waiver on the policy?
My guess is we would want to know why, but knowing that it's kind of it's not an ongoing thing and it's not a staff related thing, it's going to happen sort of thing, we would take the necessary measures.
Got it. So it's an internal district policy that requires reporting to the board, and the board can make a decision around it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would take it a little bit differently. As opposed to an internal policy, it's really a board policy. So we have internal district policies, and this one wouldn't be part of that.
It's a board policy.
It's a board policy.
That's right.
again, so board policy limitations would limit Chris's.
Yeah, look, it's just,
But-
this is an odd place for me, because in the corporate world, if you have a board policy that the board doesn't follow, you're inviting a shareholder lawsuit. So I guess what I don't understand in this case is like, is this inviting taxpayer lawsuit that the board didn't follow its own policy?
It's a policy to Chris as opposed to the taxpayer. So when you're putting limitations on Chris and
Yeah.
Chris's personal review.
Okay.
So think about it as
It's more of a guideline.
CEOs. Well, it's how they will review him at the end of the year.
That's right.
So he is missing X, Y, Z policy. They go into executive reviews, review his contract, and then that is, what do we call it? It's sort of limitations,
Okay.
and now we've got another.
Okay.
I was saying, a board member that knows more than I do. Thank goodness.
Okay.
But those, again, those policies are owned by the board. So the question is, if a board policy is missed and Chris hasn't met a specific standard, what are the ramifications?
And
You're talking about the deferred maintenance.
so we're
We're out
above
of
10% of
compliance.
the.
5%.
And welcome.
Well,
Good morning.
Thank you.
If you want to take your jacket off before we depart, you're welcome to do so. Kathy?
I would
Courtney
think
just
anytime that we're out of compliance with any of our board policy, my understanding is that there can be a complaint filed. And then it is reviewed by somebody on the admin side, and then it's brought to the board, for a final decision.
And then the board generally the board has historically accepted
Yeah,
Okay.
so at that time, I think we could say like, there's consequences for missing this. My guess would be we would just say getting to compliance and we move on.
And what's the plan or?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's no ramifications for like state funding or anything else?
No.
Not at all.
There is no statutory requirement
No
for the board to have these policies.
Got it.
Right, and when I look at this particular policy, knowing what we know because of the funding, would there be a decision to add more funding to combat this deferred maintenance in a time where we know the district is not going to be increasing funding, which means is there going to be a request to add 40 million, or I don't know what the math is to get us to 10% because I didn't look at it, but that kind of request would come at a cost. And so my gut is the board will say, we're gonna give a waiver on this until ideally what will likely happen is when we pass the bond, that will solve the deferred maintenance issue. I don't anticipate that we see any other path to getting there.
And I do think we may have had a conversation on that, especially looking at the bonds that we have coming up. There very well was probably a conversation.
Got it, okay.
Last
Well, I
year.
think I heard the answer, which is there's no statutory requirement.
No statutory
That's-
requirements, and that's why I asked Margie if there's an industry standard, like the 10% is probably based on something, but if it's been 10% in the 15 years she's been here, it may be that the board requests, hey, should we look at a different percent? Is 10% still the right number, or should we do some evaluation? 10% might very well be the number, I have no idea,
Right.
not my wheelhouse at all, but I think that would be a valid question for the board to ask. So.
And this does state that our plan for compliance is by securing funds for bond.
Right.
So that's what our
Well, your
compliance
cost went up
statement.
30% in 1 year. That's pretty hard to keep up with.
Absolutely.
And so that, I just want to draw one more distinction between district policy and board policy.
Yeah.
There are district policies that are required by statute.
Statute,
Yep. And those district policies are in place. So, it's a good example. Student discipline, I think, is required by statute.
Is there anything in the FAC workbook that we review that's statutory required?
I would have to go back and look just to be sure.
Okay.
I'm not aware of,
Any
but
of those? Okay.
I think maybe some budget adoption pieces, but without going through, I would, off the cuff, I don't want to answer that. Kathy, do you have any questions?
No, thank you for asking.
No problem. I want to remember that you're there. It's when, click off the screen, it's easy to forget you're sitting there. So I want to respect your time. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'll jump in with questions, I promise.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so any more questions for Marty? Oh, go ahead.
There was one other thing I was supposed to mention, and that's the plant contingency fund. It's supposed to be at a maximum of 3%. Right now, we're at 0.11%, and in order to spend those funds or to allocate them, it has to be approved by the Board of Ed. And we did not spend any funds. According to this, we did not spend any plant contingency funds last year.
Did you say 0.11%?
0.11%.
Okay.
So we're below, because it's supposed to be 3%, maximum of 3% of the replacement value.
Yeah.
Right now, we have 1.45 million in that fund.
Yeah.
So,
And it's a maximum, so being at
Maximum of
0.11, you're still in compliance.
Yeah.
yes.
You haven't saved more there
Correct.
than you should have.
Okay. So
So that's for 2.5.3, correct?
that was 2.5.2. So
Oh, that was 2.5.
that was part of the 2.5.2.
Oh, okay. And then do you have anything on 2.5.3?
I don't think that is me. I'm not sure who typically reports on that. But I don't believe we closed any schools due to failures. It's right here.
I think we would all know that
Two
one.
are facilities related. You might find out more this week after the frozen
No
pipes that
pipes
we
froze,
had
yeah.
at 3 places, but so
I was gonna ask in general, I mean, I'm sure that's budgeted in. Is there a percentage of how much that dug into? I mean, I'm sure there's money set aside for emergencies like that. You guys know, well, I guess you don't know the costs of the pipes
this
that
week's
burst and this
issues,
week's.
no, I don't.
Oh,
But will we
Not
get,
yet.
yeah, will we get a
Materials.
percentage of what that cut into?
Well, I know there'll be insurance claims for
Okay.
risk management. They have already started that, so we have 3 facilities that I know of.
Yeah.
Were affected, so.
any other questions for Marty?
Thank you.
Thank you so much
everybody.
for being here,
All right,
Marty.
thank you so much. Good seeing everybody.
All right, Gavin, we can go ahead and stop recording.